When it comes to collecting affordable games, the common wisdom tends to be go buy them now before they become unaffordable. To which some of you might be thinking, wait a second, you're telling me there's affordable games? Well, sure there are. Problem is, it's just not always the games that you want. Puzzle Collection Entertainment Pack for Game Boy Color will probably always be affordable, but you know what makes it even more affordable? Not buying it. Now, we're all well aware that there are unaffordable games for pretty much every system, but there's also certain games, even if you're looking at games that people consider to be good, that are very affordable, for now at least. So, question is, which games will always be affordable and which consoles will have enough of these games that they can be considered affordable to collect for? Of course, what people consider to be affordable will vary too. Regardless, there's no way to guarantee what will happen with prices moving forward. Heck, there's plenty of other things I'd feel far more comfortable guaranteeing. But with that in mind, the consoles I bring up in this video that I think will always be affordable to collect for are predictions. That's just how the future works. The key criteria I'll be going off of is that a large chunk of a console's most popular games can't be unaffordable, since those are the games most people collecting will want. Yeah, sorry Sega Saturn, but you're not invited to this party. Although, I should say that by all means, if you want to say that most consoles are affordable by simply just avoiding some of the higher profile games, then go for it. That's a great solution. And because I know people will bring it up, there's always stuff like EverDrive cards, Raspberry Pis, and all the other stuff that you can do to avoid the high prices of collecting. Okay, so the first example that jumps out to me is the Game Boy. This is probably the one that I feel the best about because it has pretty much everything it would need going for it. It became really popular back in the day and was popular for a long time, so it has plenty of copies of its games out there nowadays. Heck, there was a large chunk of time during the 90s that almost any kid who ever went on a car trip had a copy of Super Mario Land. One or two, take your pick. The main thing with the Game Boy is that I think it's been around long enough that if its prices were gonna go big at some point, it would have happened by now, similar to my dream to be an NFL quarterback. The window may have passed. The Game Boy has always been viewed as somewhat of a lesser version of the NES. While the NES has soaked up the popularity spotlight for many years, the Game Boy just kind of awkwardly lurks in the background. It has its fans, don't get me wrong, you're looking at one, but always seems to have plenty of copies available for its most popular games in comparison to the demand for them, which keeps them nice and cheap. And for some of the more notable expensive games, quick little hint for you, the import versions are a fraction of the price and the Game Boy is region free, so boom, there you go. Now, if we're talking about boxed Game Boy games, then you can just get out of here. Boxed Game Boy games are much more expensive and in some cases impossible to find, even online. Quick explanation for this: back in the day, most Game Boy boxes were treated like dog poop, tossed out, more so than the boxes or cases for other consoles too. Not sure exactly why this was the case, other than perhaps people were just in the whole space saver minimalism mindset, seeing as the Game Boy was portable, although they could have taken it a step further if you ask me. When thinking about the Game Boy as an affordable console, a part of me wanted to say, hey, why not the Game Boy Advance as well? But then a part of me thought, no. Some of its more popular games have been going up in price, and I don't think that's changing anytime soon. I think this has a lot to do with the Game Boy Advance's reputation for being sort of like a Super Nintendo, a console that experiences a lot of fervor in the collecting community. Ironically, the games that are the most Super Nintendo-y, being the straight-up Super Nintendo ports, are some of the games that are still pretty affordable on the console. But will they always be? Possibly, but I sort of think no. The next console I want to bring up is the NES. Like the Game Boy, it's been around long enough to get a sense of what the market thinks of it. In a way, it kind of feels like the grandfather of game collecting. All the other games can gather round as it tells stories about how game collecting has changed over the years. It's also kind of a weird console when it comes to collecting, because it's one of the consoles that's most famous for people wanting to collect every game in its library, And yet, if you stay away from the more obscure stuff, you can find many of its most popular games for fairly affordable prices. Ironically, while we're talking about games that are good and affordable, the NES is also a great console for those looking to get bad games that are expensive. To me, that's like buying expensive food that makes your stomach sick, but hey, everybody's got their reasons, like going for those complete sets. What's tricky though is that some of the best games on the console are incredibly iconic, the kinds of games people won't forget far into the future, and if that's the case, it wouldn't be a total shock to see prices go up. But I don't know, I just see the NES as having already hit the peak of its popularity and never getting back to that point. In other words, the people who care about it the most have already cared about it the most they ever will. Kinda like my dance moves back in the day. Hey, they swooned me a wife after all. Either way, I just don't see future generations wanting to specifically collect physical cartridges for it in quite the same way that we've seen the generation that grew up with it did. Next up, we've got the PS2, which is kind of a tweener in my opinion, being right in between what I think may or may not be an affordable console moving forward. Now, the biggest thing the PS2 has going for it is that it has so many games. I wouldn't bother counting, over 1,800 released just in North America alone. And while there's certainly a lot of bad games in there, there's also quite a few good ones. Because there are so many different desirable games on the PS2, it can sort of spread the wealth around, so to speak. Not that there aren't games that it seems like everyone with a PS2 has in their collection, but the thing is, everyone had these games in their collection back in the day too, which means they sold well and there's lots of copies to go around. Another huge factor is that PS2 games have been re-released in pretty generous fashion, with the PS3 seemingly re-releasing darn near all of the popular series into HD collections. Bananas. Lots of people prefer those versions too. I remember even seeing a narrative for a little while that PS2 hardware was obsolete because most of its best games were no longer exclusive to the original hardware. Now, there's still plenty of time for PS2 prices to spike. I mean, I'm certainly ready if it does with this graded copy of Time Crisis 2, graded it myself. But one encouraging thing, for those hoping PS2 game prices don't spike up, is that while GameCube games were going absolutely buck wild, PS2 games did a much better job of keeping their cool. Either way, I personally think the biggest thing that will keep PS2 prices down moving forward is if its most popular games continue to be re-released for play on newer consoles. So there we have it. My predictions for which consoles will remain affordable forever. And while forever is a long time, in fact I'd say it's one of the longest amounts of time, hopefully I will at least be correct for the foreseeable future. I think sometimes people just assume that just as sure as the passage of time, the prices on all games can only go up over time, not remain the same or go down. While it sure can feel that way, and that does seem to be the case for a lot of games, it's not for everything. But I am curious what you think of my predictions, as well as what some of your predictions might be. There's certainly some consoles that most people tend to ignore these days that would probably be good bets, like the Atari 2600 for example. Then for something newer, the Xbox 360 sure seems like a good bet, though it is still early. Alright, but with that, be sure to leave your answers or whatever else you'd like to say, and I will see ya in the next video. He's the